When did you see Charlie Parker first?
When did I see Charlie Parker first was I heard him at the Deuces out on the street, standing on the sidewalk on 52nd Street. Then the first time I got to see him, I think, was at what was the predecessor of Birdland?
Bob City?
No, not Bob. Was it Bob City? Is another topic we have to talk about. So I would talk about Artie Shaw, but no, it wasn't Bob City. The Royal Roost. Was it the Royal Roost? Yeah. Which was owned by the same people who then started Birdland. But that was the first bebop club in in Manhattan. The Royal Roost. It was downstairs on Broadway. Actually, some people said that it had been a taxi dance hall at one time. So that's the first time I saw him. And then at Cafe Society, and after it moved from the downstairs thing up. It didn't last very long. It was up in the village, and that I guess. Let me think. Oh, that awful place, the Open Door in the village also. With Bob Reisner, who was a real character. Bob Reisner did the first book about Charlie, which is a series of interviews. You know that book. Bobby would run sessions at the Open Door, which was a peculiar place in the village. It had a bar in front where there was an entertainer there, an elderly woman at the piano with dyed red hair, who did kind of, Irish pub kind of music, and Peg of My Heart, and oh boy. Anyway, that was told. Then you went into the main room, which I suppose it had been a Greek restaurant, although I never saw a shred of food in there. Although by law they were supposed to have it, I guess. And they had some old shuffling waiters. If you weren't drinking, you would order coffee. That's one thing that they had, and it was it wasn't a very well-kept place, but they had some fabulous music there. There are photographs. There's a famous one of Charlie and Mingus and Monk, I think, just like an all-star band. And Tony Frisella was there quite a bit. Tony and it was a weird place, but Charlie Parker, and so I'm on this, on the street sometimes, just spotting him in the village from afar. Major things with strings at Birdland. And he took the strings very seriously. That was something that he really enjoyed and really felt was maybe a step up, from the usual thing. And this was at Birdland, and Charlie had his back to the audience and was conducting a little bit and playing, and Dizzy was in the house, And Dizzy, in typical Dizzy fashion, he snuck up on the bandstand and stood behind Bird, who hadn't seen him, and started conducting the band. So people started to laugh, and that got Charlie to look around, and then he saw what was happening, and he didn't think it was funny. His face reflected, you know, that he really was, you know, hurt. He was hurt by that. And Dizzy later apologized to him in attorney's fees. But that was interesting to see him, or hear him, with the strings, because he played so beautifully. You know, he was really, Charlie Parker was one of the outstanding melodists. A lot of people don't understand that. They think about people, okay, Coco, fine, you know, wonderful. But he was a great ballad player, Jesus, you know, I mean, what he could do with a ballad. And the strings, you know, brought that out. That's why a lot of people who had not responded to bebop, Charlie Parker, whatever, the strings really did. And people put down, you know, some people put down Norman Granz, so they wanted to commercialize it. He wanted it, you know, it wasn't like Norman Granz had to force him to do it. He wanted it. Anyway, that was one thing that I remember, was that incident with Dizzy. The other one is that there is this famous story about really his last stand at Birdland with the all-star band that had Bud Powell and Blakey and Mingus, okay? And there are all kinds of stories about that, saying that Charlie was, you know, wasted and that he did that. The night I was there, he was the one who was trying to hold things together. There was nothing about him that was off in any way, but I can't say that about the others in terms of it. Bud, who could be, of course, absolutely magnificent, but also could be really out there. And on this particular occasion, he was out there. And at one point, Charlie had to walk up to the piano, and what was happening was that Bud was playing. The tune was, it was a Gershwin tune. I think it was The Man I Love. And he kept playing the first 16 bars, not ever getting to the bridge, playing that over and over again. So Bird walked over to the piano and said to him, Bud, channel, you know, channel is another term for the release, for the bridge release, channel, Bud, channel. And Bud looked up and said, oh, okay, done it. So that he had to hold it together, but he was the one who held it, didn't get any help from the other two. They might as well have been in Siberia. I mean, there was no, and I don't know, Blakey, I never liked Art Blakey, I don't want to talk about him. But, you know, he's such a great, you know, talent scout and everything. And of course, he had some wonderful bands. I don't want to get into that. But anyway, Charlie was the one who was trying to get these people to be a band, you know, which was right. That's the last time I saw him. But speaking of Birdland, my one encounter with Charlie Parker on a one-on-one, miraculous. There was a little bar upstairs from Birdland, was next door, was called the Magpie. Birdland, Magpie. It was a little bar, very narrow, long bar on the right, and a few little tables, things on the left. And I had made a meet with a friend at the Magpie. It was late afternoon, and he was late, and I was waiting, and I was the only person in the place sitting at the bar. So who should come in but Charlie Parker? Charlie Parker entered the Magpie, and it was at a time where he had recovered from not being so well. Now it was winter time, he was wearing a coat, and he walked in, and he didn't know me. I mean, I had seen him many times, but we had never talked or anything. But he came and he sat down next to me on the stool, which was a very nice gesture. He could have sat at the end, and that's right. So, of course, I said, "Oh, Mr. Parker, can I buy you a drink?" So he said, "Why don't you let me buy you one?" Which was very unusual for, well, his reputation was different. So anyway, I was totally, overwhelmed by being next to Charlie Parker with him. So he was sort of gone. We realized that we were both waiting for friends to come, and so I mentioned this was not long after Hot Lips Page had died, and I knew that, of course, they had known each other in Kansas City, and I'd even been told that he had gone to see Lips at the funeral home and everything. So I asked him about Lips, and we started talking about him. And the thing that about Bird there, which I noticed before, is that the way he spoke and the way he was much more like the older musicians that he had come up with than like a New York bebop guy, you know what I mean? So we had a conversation, and then his friend came, and that was it. But I had about 5 or 6 minutes alone with Charlie Parker, and he was really nice. On the other hand, he was not very. I'll tell you a little incident. My friend Nat Lorber, we've talked about Nat the Face. He was in the village having a coffee somewhere, and Charlie Parker, they knew each other. Everybody knew Face. That was sort of. But he had, they had actually played a jam session together and stuff. So Charlie said, I'm going up, they said, I'm going uptown, I'm going up to Birdland. He said, let's get a cab, So we got a cab and went up to Birdland. When they came up to Birdland, Charlie Parker jumped out of the cab, said goodnight, and went down the stairs. Now, Nat never had much money, and he did have a cab, he never took cabs unless he was with somebody. So anyway, there he was, and stuck with, and the cab driver, so he said, let me, I'll go down, and get, and get the money. So he went down, and at Birdland, you went down the stairs, and then there was a booth behind which, where a person sat and collected the admission, which at the time I think was $3.50 or something like that. And so Nat went down and asked this person to locate Charlie and Heidi, and so the guy or girl, whoever was on the in the booth there, asked one of the waiters to go find Charlie, and so he came back and said, "Mr. Parker is telling you to get lost." So now, fortunately, the cab driver was not, a really nasty guy. So he, shrugged it off. I think Nat had had $1 or something that he could give him, but it was nothing. So that was a not so nice example. Another thing about Nat, near the very end of Charlie's life, when he was kind of down and out, and he was staying in the village with his friend Bashir. He has been written about, and a lot has been said about the last days of Charlie Parker. But there was a joint there. I forget what street it was on, although I should remember. It was like a neighborhood bar, and not a very high class one, but they had a piano there, they had occasional music, and it was really, it later became a jazz club, but at the time it was just a neighborhood bar. And there was a strange little guy who worked for Undertaker. He did embalming. We knew him as Shorty, and he was like a barrel house piano player. And he had a gig there, where the gig was like, I think they just gave him some money or gave him some drinks and gave him some stuff. But he was there, and Nat knew him, and went there sometimes and sat in and stuff, and also he was there one night, and Charlie Parker came in, and they played, and he said, Nat said that Charlie knew the opener to West End Blues, which he did. There is a live recording of that. We ran that down. Anyway, then they took a break, and the three of them are standing outside, and having a smoke or whatever, And Tommy said, Charlie Parker said, said, "Let's all go to the Brooklyn Bridge, hold hands, and jump off." I told Stanley that. I don't know whether he'll ever use it, and if he ever finishes the biography. But that's a memorable statement, isn't it? You can, well, you don't even have to annotate it. While we're talking about that, let me say something about the Baroness, he died, they had these headlines, Nica was one of the nicest, she was a wonderful lady. She was absolutely devoted to the great musicians that she knew. About the musicians, she loved jazz. She was a Rothschild, but her father apparently was a jazz fan who was a fan of Teddy Wilson's and so on, so she thought that. She had the reputation that she had is based on the prejudice. Everybody thinks that prejudice is confined to the deep South or whatever. That's a bunch of bullshit. There was a lot of prejudice in New York City when I first came here. I became aware of it rather quickly. As soon as I befriended some black people, you would become aware of it. But in any case, the whole thing about Nica is based on the fact that she was a white woman, a rich white woman who you know, consorted with black musicians. So that's where she got her reputation. She was a terrific lady. she had a lot of, you know, she had the Bentley, which is, you know, has become famous. She was a hell of a driver. You know, she had been an ambulance driver for the Free French in Algiers during World War II. You know, when we got the Mary Lou Williams collection at the Institute, she and Mary were great friends. There are letters that Nica wrote to Mary, and she had the most beautiful handwriting, but she also put little decorations in different colors on top of the first page of the letter, and the way the envelopes are, because Mary was a saver. She saved that. That's another story. But anyway, Nica was just, she was a dear person, and she cared so much for, you know, for the people that she was really, you know, friendly with. Coleman Hawkins, for one. I mean, that's one place where I was pretty close, you know. So I knew how much she, you know, looked out for Hawk, and when he was on his decline there. Monk, she knew how to communicate with Monk. Monk was an interesting individual, to say the least. But with Charlie, you know, I mean, she was trying to help. The doctor she got for him, the doctor was she didn't know that. There was kind of the questionable doctor. He was the one who gave Kennedy the shots, you know. But I don't think he didn't do Bert any harm. I mean, it was too late, you know, to do anything for him at that point.